Have you ever felt it? Kind of like a ghost from the 20th century, still haunting our world today. An invisible battle of ideas that kicked off over 100 years ago but is still raging, influencing every single headline, every policy debate, every choice we make about our future. Well, back in 1944, as the world was literally burning, one thinker wrote a warning so powerful it still echoes through time, a message about a silent takeover of the human mind. Welcome to Animeconomy. Today, we are diving deep into Ludwig von Mises' incredibly powerful book, Omnipotent Government. We're going to explore the epic clash between two totally opposite visions for humanity. We'll uncover Mises' startling prediction for why one of them inevitably leads to chaos and war. And we're going to save the most critical part for last, the fundamental choice that Mises says we still face today, a choice that will define our freedom and our future. And it all kicks off with one single powerful warning. Right there, that's the core of Mises' warning. He basically said that a dangerous new religion had emerged. But this one didn't worship a god in the sky. It worshipped an institution right here on Earth, the state. He saw people just eagerly handing over their freedom and their own judgment, believing that the government could solve every problem and engineer a perfect world. For Mises, this wasn't just a political trend, it was a fundamental shift in the human spirit, a superstition that he believed would come at a terrible, terrible price.
So, how did this all happen? Well, Mises frames modern history not as some simple struggle between countries or classes, but as this colossal battle between two completely opposite ideas for how society should even function. It's really a tale of two philosophies, locked in a conflict that would end up deciding the fate of millions.
You have to remember, when Mises was writing this, he was in exile in America. He had literally fled the Nazi advance in Europe. So he wasn't just analyzing history from a distance, he was living through its most brutal consequences. He was trying to figure out what was the sickness that had plunged his world into darkness. And his diagnosis was that the wars and the tyranny, they weren't accidents. They were the logical, predictable outcome of one single dominant idea. This slide right here, it basically maps out the entire conflict. On one side, you've got individualism. This is the world of classical liberalism, built on the rights of the individual, economic freedom, and the idea that you, the consumer, are in charge. Your choices in the marketplace steer the entire economy. And on the other side, you have etatism. That's a word that comes from the French word for state. In this world, the state is supreme. It's all about central planning, government coercion, and the belief that the government, not individuals, should manage everything for the greater good. For Mises, these two systems are like oil and water. He argued you can't have a little of both. One will always try to destroy the other. So let's start with the first idea. Before the rise of etatism, Mises describes what he saw as a kind of golden age, a brief but really brilliant period in the 19th century where this philosophy of individualism totally reshaped the world. For Mises, this wasn't just about money. The 19th century, guided by these liberal principles, saw an absolute explosion of progress. For the first time in human history, living standards shot up for the average person. Old evils like slavery and serfdom were dismantled. Autocratic kings were replaced by democratic governments. This was the age of Beethoven and Darwin, an era where reason and science started to replace blind faith and prejudice. And this just perfectly illustrates his main point. Human freedom in all its forms is what unleashes human potential. So here's the crucial thing to get. Mises saw liberalism not as some passive, let's just let things happen philosophy. It wasn't about letting evils continue. No, it was an active, positive program. Its whole goal was to create and protect the system that made all that progress possible in the first place, the market economy. It was a philosophy designed to empower people and unleash creativity by just getting old systems of coercion out of the way. But if this system was so successful, why didn't it last? What was this powerful countercurrent that rose up to challenge it and, in Mises's view, drag the world right back into barbarism? And this brings us to the second and far more dominant ideology of the 20th century, the philosophy that Mises simply called atheism, or the worship of the state. Atheism is the complete opposite of individualism. It's the belief that progress doesn't come from free people making their own choices. No, it comes from wise experts in the government directing society from the top down. It sees the state not as, a simple night watchman protecting our rights, but as the ultimate engine of human progress, the one tool that's capable of building a paradise on Earth. This quote, it just cuts right to the heart of the atheist mindset. It's an ideology that's built on a fundamental lack of trust in ordinary people. It basically assumes that you, the individual, don't really know what's best for you. Your choices are flawed, your desires are short-sighted. Only the rulers, the planners, the experts. They have the wisdom and the moral high ground to guide you. And if they have to force you onto the correct path.
And once you accept that premise, the logic is kind of inescapable, right? The state stops being a servant and becomes the master. Every single problem, from poverty to healthcare, suddenly demands a government solution. More regulations, more bureaucracy, more control. These are no longer seen as necessary evils, but as heroic steps toward a better world. And Mises points out that this logic doesn't stop. It just keeps expanding until it consumes everything, even something as personal as how you spend your free time, with governments and totalitarian states creating programs for leisure management. The state becomes everything.
So, what happens when a society fully embraces this worship of the state? Mises argues that this chase for an all-powerful, benevolent government doesn't lead to paradise. It leads directly to disaster. By the way, if you're getting value from understanding this critical argument, just take a second to like this explainer and share it with someone who cares about the future of freedom. It's really the best way to help these ideas reach more people.
Mises's prediction is incredibly stark. He claims there are two inevitable consequences of giving the state total control. First, the complete breakdown of the economy, and second, an endless cycle of international conflict. So let's break down how he gets to these terrifying conclusions.
Okay, so this is one of Mises's most famous and honestly most controversial arguments. He didn't just say that socialism was inefficient or that it made people poor. He argued that on a fundamental level, a true, centrally planned socialist economy literally cannot function. It can't make rational decisions. So why? Well, it's because of something called the economic calculation problem.
His argument just builds step by step. So first, socialism gets rid of private ownership of factories, land, resources. The government owns everything. Well, without private owners, there's no market for these things to be bought and sold. And without a market, you can't have real prices. And prices are everything. They are vital signals that tell you how scarce or valuable something is. Without those price signals, a central planner is basically flying blind. How do you decide if it's better to build a railroad out of steel or some new alloy? You can't compare costs. You can't calculate profit or loss. You have no way of knowing if you are actually creating value or just wasting precious resources. So the key takeaway here is that for Mises, a planned economy isn't just inefficient, it's irrational. And the result isn't utopia, it's total economic chaos.
So if central planning leads to internal chaos, how in the world does it lead to external conflict? Mises argued that when a state tries to control everything inside its borders, it inevitably starts to see everything outside its borders as a threat. The same Attis logic that wrecks the domestic economy is what turns nations against each other. And the bridge between the two is economic nationalism. This slide just illustrates the shift in incentives perfectly. Under a liberal system of free trade, foreigners aren't threats, they're partners. A German citizen benefits from trading with a French citizen. War messes up this mutually beneficial exchange, so there's a powerful incentive for peace. But under atatism, the government uses things like tariffs and trade barriers to protect its domestic industries. And all of a sudden, foreign nations are no longer partners. They're economic rivals who are taking our jobs or undercutting our businesses. The goal is no longer global cooperation, but national self-sufficiency.
And this is where it gets really dangerous. If your nation can't get the resources it needs through peaceful trade, the only option left is to take them by force. The pursuit of economic self-sufficiency, or autarky, naturally leads to a desire for more land, more resources, more living space, or Lebensraum, which is what the Nazis called it. For Mises, the wars of the 20th century were not some fluke. They were the inevitable, violent conclusion of a world that had abandoned free trade for state-controlled economies.
Now we arrive at the very heart of Mises' message, the part that goes beyond the history of the 20th century and speaks directly to us, right here, right now. He asks us to look past all the superficial labels of politics and see the real conflict that's happening underneath.
Think about our political debates today. They're so often framed as left versus right, socialist versus capitalist. But Mises would say we're missing the point. The real question, the one that truly matters, is a lot simpler and way more profound. It's about where power ultimately sits.
This is it. This is the ultimate choice he presents to us. Is society a grand, spontaneous order that emerges from the free and voluntary choices of billions of people in the marketplace? Or is society a machine to be designed, controlled, and directed by the coercive power of a central authority? Is the consumer king, or is the bureaucrat king? For Mises, there really is no middle ground. Every law, Every regulation, every government program is a small step in one of these two directions. And this brings us to the question Mises leaves for us. He wrote this almost 80 years ago, but it honestly feels like it could have been written this morning. In our world facing climate change, pandemics, economic instability, the call for more government action is stronger than ever. And for many people, that seems like the only rational response. But Mises' warning just hangs in the air, that in our search for security, we risk sacrificing the very freedom that makes progress possible, potentially paving the road to outcomes far worse than the problems we're trying to solve. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you stayed until the end, it means you're part of a small group of people committed to understanding how the economy works and how it shapes the world. That commitment is rare, and it separates you from the majority. Be sure to subscribe to Animeconomy. Here, we turn economics, politics, and power dynamics into clear, visual stories so you can understand how the world really works. If you want to explore these ideas even further, you can find a link to purchase Omnipotent Government in the description below. Goodbye, and see you in the next explainer.